Would you believe it if I told you that a garden of this size cost someone $2.5 million? I didn't believe it either until I actually did some research and found out it's true. So if you're wondering about who it is and why it costs so much, that's what we're here to talk about and have a great discussion of. So let's get into it. I think you all are gonna love this. So for those wondering, this garden here is right around 2,800 square feet. It's actually 2,900 square feet, almost to the foot. But in reading an article that came into my news feed, it was on the White House vegetable garden. And it was surprising to me that in 2009, Michelle Obama, the first lady of Barack Obama, set up a White House garden. Now, I am all for growing vegetables, and this is not political. Don't worry. If there's anything on either side of the line, it will be removed in the comment section. This is not what this is about. This is strictly about something that I think is worth having a conversation about as it pertains to gardening and promoting sustainability. So with that out of the way, back to what I was talking about. So back in 2009, Michelle Obama started the first White House garden that's been there, the first White House vegetable garden that's been there for several decades. And this was a really cool thing that was done to promote to the younger generation and to the public that there needs to be more awareness about eating healthier food. And I was all for that. I definitely am someone that thinks that we need to be getting away from fast food and away from highly processed food and really understanding where our real food comes from. I think that is something that is definitely a great thing to be promoting. But what I really was surprised by was this article that I found. It was actually in Food Magazine, but then I sourced it back and I found several other sources to confirm, so it's not just one source. I think that's a really bad thing to do, is just to go off one source and think the sky is falling if it might not even be true. And so it is true that the White House vegetable garden, as you'd think it'd be some grandiose, elaborate thing, was actually intended to kind of mimic a home garden setting. That's what it was originally intended for. And it was, to my knowledge, that the garden actually started out as 1,100 square feet, and they added, in several years later, in 2011, they added 1,700 more square feet to the garden, bringing it to a total of 2,800 square feet. And that is about the exact dimensions of this garden here. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, so where is this money coming from? The money is actually coming from a grant that the Parks Department, who maintains the garden, actually received from the Burpee Seed Company. The Burpee Seed Company gave them a $2.5 million donation to upkeep the garden through 2036. So if you're asking yourself at this point why a 2,800 square foot garden needs to cost $2.5 million, I'm at that same question mark. See, it really baffles me as to how a company like Burpee, who I do respect and really admire what they've managed to do over the course of their business, being a business person myself, I definitely am not saying that they can't put their money where they would like. My question to them, and what really disappointed me, was that they stand for the cultivation of vegetables on a home scale. They stand for teaching and inspiring young kids. And in fact, in the article, there was a quote by the current CEO of the Burpee Seed Company, who said that they wanted the White House vegetable garden to be an inspiration for all who looked at it and admired the beauty of the garden. And it really brought back a question that I had initially, which is, who benefits from the garden? The garden actually produces all of its food, roughly 2,000 pounds per year, which we'll get into. It's another issue that I have with it. Roughly 2,000 pounds of food per year is produced, which is fed to White House staff. It's not fed to the public, meaning that the only thing that the garden is good for the public eye is to look at. And that to me is very troubling, with the fact that there was $2.5 million set aside for good public PR from the Burpee Seed Company, in which no one from the public actually benefits. Also, a side note to that is that $2.5 million was spent. If that was not the most glaring issue with this whole thing, it's that not only are we producing on this on this square footage, roughly 1.5 times more vegetables or pounds of vegetables than they are. So we're actually more efficient. We did this garden for roughly $700. And I ran the numbers for the annual upkeep through 2036 to compare. And while they are at roughly $2.5 million for expenditures, we are at roughly $3,500, roughly. Now that could change varying if we need to replace the soil fully or not. And so I ran all the numbers, and the most extreme is $4,200. $4,200 compared to $2.5 million. And I think that is really where I have the biggest issue with it, is that they're trying to promote this to the home gardener, to the next generation of kids, to show them that this type of thing is doable, and they're trying to inspire kids. Yet if you ask the kids if they had $2.5 million to do it, it would probably be quite a discouraging thing to find out. And a lot of people that looked at that garden, if they knew how much that cost, would probably discourage them from ever trying to garden again. And so what I do on this channel is I try to show you how to do it the most efficient way possible, saving you the most money possible, because instead of, like they stated in the article, switching out wood chips for a actual like green cement. So instead of going the cheapest route and showing people what's really possible and actually kind of humbling yourself to the average person because you don't have a $2.5 million budget, you're instead putting in the premium, highest quality things possible. Not that wood chips look any worse. I think wood chips actually look more aesthetically pleasing than green cement. Another thing that they did was, instead of using cedar, which is naturally rot resistant but lasts roughly 30 years, about 12 years longer than their estimated budget, they instead insisted on putting steel, which per foot is right around 3 times more expensive than cedar. So you have to ask yourself here, what is really going on, and why is so much being spent on really so little of a return? And I would really like to chime in, and I would like you all to chime in the comments box in a constructive way to kind of come to I guess a better understanding and have a conversation about this, because I think as a gardening community, we really need to be talking about this, about the impression that we leave on the people who are impressionable, the younger generation, or even those, maybe even you are watching this, who are wanting to start a garden, and you think to yourself, well, I cannot do anything of what Luke's doing. I don't have that in the budget. And think about it, I went the most budget-friendly way possible to show you all what is possible on a small budget. And here they are putting in steel and concrete and making this elaborate garden that is intended on being an inspiration to growing food. And while it can be inspirational, it's certainly not attainable. And that's my biggest issue with this. And finally, the thing that I wanted to close on is that if this garden really cost $2.5 million, if the Burpee Seed Company is watching, or anyone from the White House is watching, sign me up, because holy smokes, I could do it for $1 million. And I'd still have several tens of thousands of dollars left over. And so if you talk about the production on a square footage of land, I'm producing roughly 1.5 times more produce than they are on that same square footage. I don't have to weed the garden if maintenance is an issue and beauty is to be paramount. I had a weed-free garden the entire year. I spent maybe a total of 3 to 4 hours at most weeding the garden. If watering is paramount and watering is part of that cost, we implemented core gardening in our beds and only had to water roughly 5 to 7 times last summer. And if materials is the reason, well, I can show you all how to make your beds for roughly $28 per bed. We can do it on a dime, and while it might not look the most extravagant to all of the world leaders coming to visit, it certainly would fulfill the mission of why the garden was put in, which is the mission that I believed in, which is promoting this to everyone in the United States and getting people away from fast food and promoting this lifestyle as something that is doable, conducive for actually feeding your family and lowering your cost of living and bettering your life. And that's what I really stand behind. And again, I go back to the fact that, I don't care who puts their money where, but I find it really troubling the fact that when you give someone a blank check, they're going to use every bit of that blank check. As we've seen, it can be very wasteful. There's no standard as to what is really expected. It's just, here you go. And how I really would have loved to see that money put to good use is for, this garden here, like I said, cost me $700. And I said that if this garden was to go through 2036, like they were expecting as well, 18 years, this would cost me roughly $4,200 to upkeep through, at the most expensive rate, through 2036, sorry. So what I would really love to see is for $4,200 to be spent in city after city around the United States and actually put in gardens that the public can benefit from, that the public can actually taste the vegetables, that you can donate to the local soup kitchens, that you can actually benefit the community, because the community is not being benefited by simply looking at something. And while it might inspire a few dozen kids that come to the White House, it will certainly inspire a few dozen thousand of people that benefit from the local community gardens that could have benefited from that $2.5 million. And granted, I'm not in that position to simply give money out. My company is still very small, but you can bet your bottom that when I am in that position, or if I ever am in that position, I would never, knowing what I know, willingly give $2.5 million to a garden as small as ours with such little expectation to come out of it. So that's all I have to talk about. I hope to hear you in the comments box below. And remember, if there is any left or right or center bashing, it will be removed, regardless if you're my friend or not. So I want this to stay positive, and I want this to be conducive for a thoughtful conversation. So as always, I hope you all enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something new, and we'll catch you all later. See ya.